So California is not participating in the shale revolution. So you should pencil in ever rising power prices and a sustained energy crisis. California is not part of the American, much less the North American transport network, so it cannot generate economies of scale. Los Angeles cannot even generate economies of scale within LA. This all urges California to use its ocean frontage to integrate with places over the horizon. But unfortunately, that pattern is collapsing. And of course, Santa Clarita itself is largely hived off from the rest of LA. That means that Santa Clarita cannot compete in anything that requires cheap or reliable transport. You also cannot compete in anything that's low margin because you can never achieve economies of scale. You must move up the value added chain as far and as quickly as possible. So let's look at what COVID and deglobalization are making available. Every industry has its own characteristics, but review what we know. Finance will become more difficult, but not in the US. Complex supply chains are going away, but the United States writ large does not need to worry about transport. The United States has the best skilled labor market in the world, and skilled labor is mobile. Proximity to markets is key, and the United States is the market that matters. And large industry relocations will require large greenfield footprints. With that in mind, I see 6 subsectors of manufacturing that are going to relocate to the United States in large scale. The first, top left, is automotive. The automotive industry is one of the most complex in the world. Everyone builds a little bit of everything. But what coronavirus plus the trade war have done is they've disrupted these complex supply chain systems. Combine that with shale lowering local costs, and a lot of this has already moved back and more will in the year to come. Second, electronics, the bottom left. Kind of like automotive, everyone produces a lot of everything, but there's nothing really secretive about it. There's no real technological breakthroughs that people are trying to predict. That means it's easier to relocate than automotive because you don't have to worry about intellectual property to the same degree. Third, heavy machinery, top one, top center. This is one of those that is going to move very, very quickly. It's similar to automotive, but it's a lot more concentrated because not everybody needs a forklift. Now, there's a clause in the new NAFTA agreement that mandates that 80% of components must come from within North America. Here in the United States, we've largely outsourced that entire sector to China since the year 2000. It's all coming roaring back now. Bottom center is another one that's moving very quickly, wiring. The shale revolution has pushed production costs because of energy through the floor. Once you have the ore, you have to smelt it into an ingot and then pull it into a wire. Those are very energy intensive states, which means the United States is now the low cost producer. Top right's a fun one that nobody really saw coming, textiles. The technology of automated yarn spinning and cloth weaving and cutting is now cheaper than doing it with human labor in places like India and Bangladesh. We're going to see that industry writ large move back to the West. None of these 5 are what I would consider perfect for Santa Clarita. You don't really have a competitive advantage in land, labor, or energy. But the last one, the bottom right, semiconductors, that just might be for you. Now, some parts of the computing supply chain can be relocated right now. Motherboards, flash drives, final computer assembly, putting together things that are made from microchips. That's all currently in Thailand and China, and all of those facilities are already looking for new locations more appropriate to the world that we are entering. For the steps that can't be automated, where you still need human eyes and fingers, Mexico is a solid candidate. But for steps where it can be automated, the United States looks pretty good, and it might be something that Santa Clarita would want to look into. But I'm, for you, more interested in the earlier steps of the process, the manufacturing of the chips themselves. These 4 photos kind of give you the rough idea of how it works. In the bottom right, you start with silicon powder and you melt it down and draw it into a crystal. You slice it into thin wafers. Those wafers in the top right are then doped and baked to form the pathways that electrons follow in the semiconductors. You then get the top left, a big old disk with dozens, if not hundreds, of these kind of pre-chip materials. And those are broken apart in the bottom left and installed into chip formats that can then be used in any sort of computer process. The fun part about this is that this is all done in independent countries, individual countries. But the really fun part is all of this, from the drawing of the crystals to the doping and baking of the chips to the breaking apart and the making of the microprocessors themselves. It's all done in the same facility. It's a clean room issue. It all has to be done under the same roof. Now, relocating a semiconductor fabrication facility isn't something to be done lightly or quickly. Those are multi-billion-dollar facilities. But I encourage you to think big, because these fab facilities are going to have to move. To give you an idea of the speed, all these shifts in manufacturing are not simply a forecast. This break from China is already underway. This graphic shows how fast things have moved to this point. The slider indicates what has left or come to China or other locations in the last couple of years. The blue is for China specifically, and the further left the slider is, the greater the percentage of total inputs that are now coming from somewhere else. There are a few subcategories here to pay attention to. First, these three categories are one where US shale is likely to predominate and is driving the change. Second, it's a largely regulatory issue, places where Team Lighthizer has forced changes into the treaty, which preferences North American production. Third are areas where Team Lighthizer has basically thrown tariffs on China and encouraged companies to relocate anyway. And then finally, there's the issue of cost in China rising, primarily, although not exclusively, due to rising labor costs. Now, in the industry where the Chinese have managed to maintain market share, energy, chemicals, agriculture, these are primarily industries in which there's a degree of heavy industrial legacy plant. You don't want to move this stuff. It's like a major refinery, a major chemicals plant. And it takes time to build the new infrastructure. But the United States is the world's cheapest producer of natural gas, which is the primary input for most of these processes. So all of this is going to move, and it just takes a little bit of time for the United States to build out the industrial infrastructure. That is already happening. That was happening before coronavirus. That was happening before the trade war. So all of this is going to vanish in relatively short order. Second, the industries where China is losing market share most quickly: furniture, electronics, machinery. All of those are industries where incremental shifts are viable. If you have a car that has 3,000 parts, well, you can make 2 or 3 in a different location. But the more parts you build in other locations, the more you've established an alternate production system elsewhere. It's an accelerating process. Most independent estimates project today that operational costs for manufacturing in North America in every manufacturing sector is now lower than pre-existing China-centric Asian manufacturing. Now, that doesn't mean you can just flip a switch. You still have to build the industrial plant in the United States. That is not free. But if you know that the end result of this is a better operating environment, the case is being made industry by industry that it's time to go. Just in calendar year 2019, we had a 20% reduction in the shipments from China to the United States for value-added manufacturing components. It is all moving. So let's cross some T's and dot some I's when it comes to semiconductors. The fab facilities are big. They require big investment and a lot of political capital. They don't move lightly, but they do move, and they are starting to.